band,
Right.
too.
Right.
You know, or establish the music with Dave, and then it changes with Sammy, because Sammy brings in this idea of the power ballad. At the same time, Eddie, I suppose, is more inspired to write in a different way for this new guy.
Sure.
Who has the different way of singing. He's a little less straight improvisational. We know he's more technical.
Right.
You know, I don't know. I suppose the range is different or better. He's certainly more confident in all of his parts of his range, that's for sure. He's not ducking notes as much. And yeah, totally different personality. But yes, Sam, when he comes in, I think he does change the music a lot more than, you know, AC/DC didn't really change the music very much when Brian came in.
Right, that's very true.
Right?
That's very true.
So yeah, I'd say different band, sure.
And in terms of the Sam era, it's interesting. They had a lot of success in the Sam era. They had #1 albums, they had hit singles, but that era is not really revered the way the Roth era is revered. If you play radio today, you're going to hear way more old Van Halen songs, Running with the Devil, Ain't Talking About Love, Jamie's Crying, Dance the Night Away, Unchained, Pretty Woman, Little Guitar. You'll hear all this stuff on the radio, but you don't hear the Sam stuff as anywhere near replayed and revered and looked back on as being, well, classic rock. It doesn't have that vibe. And why do you think that is?
Well, I think the 80s is still considered uncool. The 70s has, for a long, long time, had an evergreen quality about it. I mean, I don't remember even in my 30, 40 years thinking about music, people putting down 70s music ever very much. But people have always put down 80s music for various reasons, and Van Halen does step in it a little bit with the look. More Sam than anybody, I suppose. Although the guys really hair metaled it up pretty badly. I mean, there's certain bands that kind of sidestep that nicely. Aerosmith and AC/DC would be too.
Uh-huh.
But there are bands from the 70s, like certainly Kiss, stepped in it big time.
Oh, yeah.
Van Halen looked pretty hair metally too.
I said Kiss dove into it head first.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think Van Halen are a little guilty of looking a little silly too.
Yeah.
And the productions and the power ballad thing. I mean, Van Halen's power ballads were pretty darn maudlin, just like Aerosmith's power ballads.
Right.
Aerosmith eventually was doing Angel, which is a lot different from Home Tonight or Dream On. Certainly Dream On.
Right.
And Van Halen's, you know, a lot of those ballads aren't great. What I like about I love When It's Love and stuff like, not When It's Love, but Why Can't This Be Love?
Right.
I love when they made the hybrid between the ballad and the rock song, or made a pop song.
Right.
Van Halen with Sammy was good at pop, but the power ballads were just by rote power ballads.
Right.
I mean, they wrote them, but they aren't a lot different from a Diane Warren power ballad. Sammy just thinks that way.
Yeah, but the thing is that the Roth era dipped a lot into the 80s. You had 4 of the 6 albums with Roth in the beginning were from the 80s. You got Women and Children First, and then you got Fair Warning, and you got Diver Down 1984. None of that stuff is snuffed at. That stuff is considered classic. Hot for Teacher, Panama, I'll Wait, Little Guitars, Pretty Woman, And the Cradle Will Rock, Everybody Wants Some, Unchained. This stuff is drenched in classic rock. You get 2 years later with 5150, that stuff's not considered classic rock. It just doesn't have the same hold. It doesn't.
That's interesting. It's interesting you say that, but, you know, I've never thought of it this way, but here's what I'm going to say about that. Number one, the 80s don't start till 1983. So the only Van Halen album with David of the 80s is 1984.
Right.
And I'm not saying just because it's in 1984 versus 1983 and the 80s have started. I'm saying it's the big one of the video age.
Right.
And the looks and the tropes.
Okay.
And all that stuff. But musically, it's daring, and let's talk really daring, because basically Van Halen's most conservative album before Sammy even shows up is the first album. But the second, the third, and the fourth are crazy, grungy, Led Zeppelin-esque, taking chances all over the place, bizarre albums. So they really should be commended for their creativity and artistic fearlessness, really,
Sure.
across those records. So those records are really bloody obscure sounding. Fair Warning and Women and Children First.
Yeah.
I mean, Women and Children First is opaque.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a crazy, dark, and brutal album.
Yeah.
And Fair Warning, a lot of it is too.
Yeah.
And even when they get light on that album, you almost say, what are they doing? This isn't even commercial. When they get light and poppy in the Dave years, you don't think, wow, they're being corporate. You think, this is commercial suicide.
Right.
It just sounds weird, right?
That's
so
true.
those albums are basically, I really think every one of those albums is a 70s album. I mean, the first one, like I say, that even sounds remotely, and it's not even the sound. I'm psyching myself out here. It's the videos that are 80s.
Right.
Those records are still bizarre.
Yeah.
I mean, I've often said, you know, a couple of my favorite Van Halen songs, I don't even mind saying I love Jump, but I love Girl Gone Bad. And I love I'll Wait.
Oh, yeah.
And they're radical. They're strange.
Yeah.
Then you've got a 70s song in House of Pain.
Right.
Panama, I never liked very much because that sounds like a lazy Sammy Hagar song. I'm not crazy about Panama. I don't like Four on the Floor either. I don't like bass drum on 1, 2, 3, and 4, right?
Okay.
But, you know, I love Drop Dead Leg.
Oh, my favorite,
Top Jimmy. So, I mean, that whole album's great. Although now we get into something else because it's really a friggin' EP, isn't it? I mean, I do get ticked off at how short Van Halen albums are.
It really is.
The first 6 albums could be considered EPs.
Yeah.
I know.
Right?
That really does bother me. I mean, it does bother me that we have so little. But it's this strange genius they have for making you focus, right?
Right.
They're almost saying, you know what? We just want you to pay attention on this 28 minutes, please, right?
Right, because there's no garbage. They cut out the crap. And remember, between 78 and 84, they were putting out an album almost every year during that time period.
Yeah, let's also consider that they're dealing with vinyl too, so you don't have a ton of room on a vinyl album. It's not like a CD where you could put 15 songs. You just don't have that room on a vinyl album.
Yeah, but you know, I always figured that was a bit of a cop-out because many records are 40 minutes long. And I don't think they sound any worse because of that. I mean, the only time I remember getting a Status Quo Greatest Hits album that was 60 minutes long, and I remember it sounded thin because it was 60 minutes. But a 40-minute album, and you know, a 38-minute album is pretty routine. So yeah, I mean, they were short, but you know, the first one, I don't know how long the first one is, but it certainly doesn't feel short. There's so much on that, and like I say, it's their most conservative album. It's their most professional album, of course.
Sure.
It has no Brown sound to it whatsoever. It basically sounds like a fully professional corporate album. And then the next one, they started getting dangerous.
Right.
Wow, that's an interesting perspective, because when I hear the first album, I think Brown sound all the way. Your perspective is really interesting.
Well, I just find it very high fidelity, perfectly put together. It's not fast and loose in any way. I mean, they really, it's almost like the Go to Vancouver, Try Hard thing. They tried super hard, but then obviously there's a huge contrast to the second one.
Yeah.
To me, the second one is where the Brown sound starts kicking off. To me, the first one doesn't sound like a strange band. It sounds like a incredibly talented band. I mean, that's another thing I find super interesting in that. All of our rock heroes are pooching it in 1978, 1979. Aerosmith is falling apart.
Right.
Ted Nugent is going through his divorce, starting to make. I mean, Ted's a little bit of an anomaly, but because I love State of Shock and I love Scream Dream. But Blue Oyster Cult's getting mellow. Derringer is getting mellow. Stars makes the disastrous Attention Shoppers album.
Right.
Deep Purple's breaking up. Sabbath is falling to pieces. And we know Van Halen blowing him off the stage. Uriah Heep is fading from memory. So everybody is going away.
Right.
And this band walks in, strides into the wake of basically the worst time you could be a heavy metal band.
And the whole disco movement was going on.
Disco, exactly, and you've got punk, and you've got the weak tea version of punk in America with Skinny Tie New Wave.
Right.
You've got a recession in the vinyl industry. 1979 was the year that was supposed to be saved by In Through the Outdoor, The Wall, and the Eagles' Long Run. It was apparently, I believe, the first year where record sales were down.
Right.
You know, pretty soon there'd be a new wave of British heavy metal that would gestate and kick off a massive, complete 10-year run for heavy metal that would take root in California starting in 1983. But basically, 1980 to 1983, metal is the domain of England, and that's where metal begins to have this new life. But Van Halen in 1978 is the weirdest thing in the world to come out.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible.
Yeah.
They basically kicked the butts of every single American band.
Yeah.
They basically were the greatest thing going, and they're on their first album, which is nuts. Right?
And also, I think that they had a lot more time in perfecting that. The other albums were made while they were on the road, and they had to quickly come off, record an album, and move. So they had a little dirtier, faster feel to it.
Yeah, and also with the first album, they were relying on Ted a lot more because they had never recorded professionally before like that.
Right.
So if Ted made a suggestion, they were like, all right, let's go for it.
Right.
Whereas later on, they were like, no, we're more confident now. So
right.
We're going to go off the rails.
Sure.
Plus, they had that 4-year gestation period, woodshedding, playing like crazy all around. They had a very strange history. It's an entire local history.
Yeah.
But it's huge. They're local superstars in this big market, right?
Right. It's true.
They're the classic example of when people say this, sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. I mean, there's a lot of bands that dispel this thing, but that whole thing, the cliche about you have your whole life to make your first album, you got 6 months to make your second one.
Right.
Van Halen is a living example of that because the second one is the dark horse, the redheaded stepchild of all those records. It's the one where everybody says, well, it's not that great. It doesn't really have any hits. It's dark. It's murky. Of course, we all loved it as kids because it was heavy. But even instantly, I remember as kids, I was 15, 16 years old at that time. I remember thinking, wow, this is like the punk rock version of Van Halen.
Yeah.
The heavy metal songs on the first one. I remember getting that first record and adoring and worshiping half of it, and then the other half was like, this is just like my other favorite American bands.
Oh,
like
wow.
Your Little Dreamer, Running with the Devil, Jamie's Crying, Ice Cream Man. It's like, this is basically mid-grade Y&T.
Okay.
But the rest of it, wow. I'm the one.
I can hear some of our listeners screaming blasphemy.
No, I can understand. He likes a harder edge. That's all right. I mean, that's fine.
Yeah, I know.
And that's where the fireworks are. The harder edge is where Atomic Punk and I'm the One and Talk About Love. Like all of those were basically top flight. It does take you back to the first Montrose album. The first Montrose album is essentially the first modern American heavy metal album.
Right.
And here Van Halen is 5 years later of, us loving, but still there's not a big evolution of mankind across the Aerosmith, Ted Nugent, Blue Oyster Cult, and Kiss record.
Right.
It really goes Montrose and, Rocks is a damn good album, but it's still kind of traditional. It goes Montrose, We Love Rocks, 76, but 78, Van Halen, basically super smart Mensa Mad metal band that we get in America really since the first Montrose album.
So I wanted to ask you, in the book, do you address this issue? Now, obviously, this was the craziest time in Van Halen history. When Sammy exits, they have that song from the Twister soundtrack, okay, Humans Being. Then they do the Greatest Hits album where they bring Dave back for 2 songs. They do this whole promotion as if Dave is coming back, and then the whole MTV debacle, and then they flip the switch and put Gary Cherone in the band, and then don't release another album for 2 years. That is the craziest period of Van Halen. Do you address that in the book?
Well, that's a lot of stuff, and it is all kind of there in parts as you move along in the book. I don't address the idea that your very kind of like interesting idea that it is crazy and it's a surreal world. I think the surrealness comes out of the book as you hear all of this stuff unfolding.
Right.
The way you put it is really cool because I mean, it just proves what a surreal circus world it is.
Yeah.
With isolation and secretiveness and not saying things and feuds all over the place and these weird, little tracks that come around. By the way, my favorite songs from Sammy are Humans Being and Don't Tell Me What Love Can Do and Up for Breakfast. And what the heck is he